Thanks for checking out the weekly sermon from Church of the Resurrection. We pray that God will use this message to speak to you and help you grow in your faith journey. We'd like to invite you to join us next week at one of our services, whether in live worship online at core.org/live or in person at one of our locations in the Kansas City area. Church of the Resurrection is one church in multiple locations. To learn more about our service times and ministries, please visit core.org. We hope you enjoy this message.
As we continue in worship, I invite you to hear these words of Scripture. Our first passage today is from Proverbs. Speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. Speak out in order to judge with righteousness and to defend the needy and the poor. In Matthew's Gospel, we hear, "In everything do to others as you would have them do to you." And in Ephesians 4, we read, "Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up, as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear." And finally, in James 2, we hear these words, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm, and eat your fill,' and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead." May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and understanding of Scripture.
Americans spent over $145 billion on technology this Christmas. We spend an average of 4 hours a day on our screens. We look at our smartphones an average of 58 times each day. More than 70% of us use social media. Technology touches every aspect of our lives. It holds the promise of enormous good. But misused, it can cause untold pain, leaving us feeling isolated, anxious, depressed, or addicted. It's been said that technology makes a tremendous servant, but a terrible master. This month, we're exploring how we can avoid the perils and unleash the promise of technology in our lives, our families, and our communities.
It's great to be with you again today as we continue our series of sermons on the connection between our faith and our technology. And after last week's sermon on our possible addiction to our cell phones and our technology, one of you, a guy named Jonathan, sent me this photograph of I think it was his favorite Christmas present. It came from his 11-year-old daughter. Take a look. And it says, "Dad, I love you more than my smartphone." I love that. That's a big statement. Well, my hope is that after last week's sermon, if you had a chance to hear it, and if you didn't, I hope you go back and listen to it, but that maybe you made some changes this week. I know in my life, my relationship with my cell phone and my technology changed. There were things that I did differently. I began thinking about it each day. How can I use my cell phone for good, but not use it in ways that harm me or other people or separate me from family and friends? Today, we're going to look at the peril and the possibilities related to social media. And we're going to do that actually over a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about it again next week when we talk about the 7 deadly sins. But today, we're going to talk about it in connection with Dr. Martin Luther King weekend. And we're going to talk about how we can use social media in a way that draws people into a movement, that draws people into helping the world look more like the kingdom of God, or ways that end up alienating other people from us, or lead us to find ourselves, alienated from them. So we're going to talk about this. It's a really important topic. And I guess I'd start by reminding you what social media is. So when we talk about social media, we're talking about computer programs, computer websites. We're talking about apps that show up on our phones or computers or our tablets. And all of these are aimed at helping us communicate or share our ideas, other people to be able to share their ideas, companies and organizations and even political parties sharing ideas. But to make it social media, it also means that it invites a conversation. It means that other people are able to give feedback to what we've said. We can show photographs, we can show videos, we can comment. So in some ways, Amazon or other shopping sites are also social media. They're the owners of those businesses or products are letting us know something about their products and trying to convince us to buy them. And we have a chance to leave reviews. And when we can leave reviews, it's somewhat like on Facebook or Twitter, where we can make comments to other people's posts. And so it's an interactive communication device in which ideas are shared and feedback is given. That's what social media looks like in the end. And as we think about that, all of our efforts at social media are, again, a two-way street. So others are communicating, we're communicating back. And often it's individuals communicating with other individuals. And so we find a lot of awesome technology there where we can share our pictures, our life, the reels from our life, what's actually happening in our lives with all of the people who are our friends. And they can share with us. And we have a chance to look and see what's going on in each other's lives. And that's really awesome, and it keeps us connected. And as we're going to learn next week, that also can have some negative impacts on our lives. Again, we'll connect on that next Sunday. But as we're thinking about this, we're also thinking about the relationship we have with our technology and the kind of feedback loops we give to one another. And here I was thinking about when we give feedback, we can make reviews at businesses. We can post comments to people's pictures on Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it might be. We can use emojis to do that really quickly. So we can quickly give a bit of feedback on what we think about somebody's ideas they posted or what we think about their pictures or videos or whatever it might be. Just out of curiosity, I wanted to see what were the top emojis that were shared in America in the last year. And Adobe published this, the top 5 emojis shared in 2022. I thought you might enjoy seeing this. US emoji users' top 5 favorite emojis are, and you can see, of course, the happy face that is, I'm so happy and I'm laughing and there's so much joy that I've got tears of joy. And then we've got the thumbs up, we've got the heart, we've got the rolling, like rolling around on the ground. You're so happy, or it's not just happy, but you're just laughing so much. And then there's sad emojis. And of course, many of us have used these. All right, so I want to jump into how we use social media, because social media can be powerful and uplifting and awesome and exciting, but we can also use it in ways that actually brings harm. It alienates us. We're meant to connect with our families and friends, but depending on what we post, we might actually find our friends unfriending us. We might find our family members no longer talking to us because of what we posted on social media. And part of the dilemma is that when we're posting on a screen and we're not looking into the face of people that we care about and love, it becomes easy for us to say things where we're not thinking, how does this sound to someone else? And especially if you're not really thinking about other people, you're just thinking about what you're feeling, what you want, what you like, what irritates you, and you just post away, it's possible that you're not really thinking about what does this sound like to someone else. You're the one with deaf ears and not actually paying attention to how does this sound, how's it going to make people feel? And you have the same experience with other people. So there are times, I'm guessing, that most of you have had someone who said something on Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or some other, TikTok or something that just so frustrated you, so irritated you that you no longer were willing to listen to them. Sometimes we've found here at Church of the Resurrection, I've had a number of people, dozens of people tell me they no longer communicate with this family member or that family member after they posted something that was alienating to them. And often that looks like I make a statement and I assume that everybody else feels the same way. But if I don't hold those same views, I feel really just trounced. I feel like you've just stepped on me or you've dissed me for not holding the same views you have and irritated me in the process and then alienated me. This is where our social media, which is meant to connect us, ends up disconnecting us and leaving us unfriended. Social media can be used to spread love and kindness and encouragement, to build other people up, or it can be used to poke them in the eye and make them feel like they're devalued and less than because they don't see things the way that you see them. Or sometimes you can say things that are deeply personal to someone else. I mean, they really matter to that person, and you take the opposite view and you don't think about the people who are going to read those posts, and they just feel hurt by the things that we have said. Social media is a megaphone. So we have a chance to take our message and then we shout it out there. And then anybody who follows us at all is now subject to hearing that message. And often we can't tell by a message and an exclamation point or something else, the tone of what somebody else is coming to the conversation with. And so when that tone feels like it's deaf to somebody else's concerns, it doesn't really care how you feel, again, we find ourselves hurt or alienated by that. And it's not just what other people say to us, it's what we end up saying to other people as well. And so in all of this, we have the power to do great good, but we have the power to cut people. We have the power to insult them, to demean them, to make them feel like their feelings don't matter to you. And then once more, we find instead of connecting us, we are disconnected, we are unfriending or being unfriended by other people. I'm reminded of the words of James chapter 3, verses 5 through 10. And by the way, when it comes to social media, I was looking this week on the scriptures that would speak into how we use social media. Almost everything in the New Testament speaks to this. I mean, this is a very biblical idea, is how we use our words. And so James 3, 5 through 10, even though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts wildly. Think about this, a small flame can set a whole forest on fire. The tongue is a small flame of fire, a world of evil at work in us. It contaminates our entire lives. Because of it, the circle of fire is set on fire. The circle of life is set on fire. And there I think about parents and children and relationships with siblings and that whole circle of life, grandparents, and we set it on fire. We blow it up by virtue of the sometimes callous things that we say, or in the midst of a passionate moment, we end up saying something that hurts other people. So it goes on to say, people can tame and already have tamed every kind of animal, bird, reptile, and fish. No one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it, we both bless the Lord and Father and curse human beings made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing come from the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, it shouldn't be this way. That's a really great passage to maybe post on a card when you're sitting down at your computer, or somehow have it come up when you're getting ready to post on social media. Am I using my tongue in a way that builds up or sets a fire that's going to destroy? Now, again, when James is talking about the tongues, he's talking about the words that we use. And it doesn't have to be the tongue speaking, audibly. It's our fingers on our social media. Are we setting things aflame? Are we cursing other people by the words that we use, the tone that we take, the way we express ourselves? Our words have power. And we know, we've heard when we were children, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never harm me. But as we said in a sermon series last year, that is absolutely not true. Words do have the power to harm us. Often on social media, we feel the freedom to be able to post things that we're feeling because we're not actually looking at somebody else on the other side of the screen. We don't even think about it. We can't see their expression in their eyes when they feel hurt by what we've said. We just blast away. And then only later on, when somebody defriends us, or when somebody, says something back, and sometimes they're angry or upset, or they challenge us a little bit, and all of a sudden our feelings get hurt, and then sometimes we get defensive and we end up posting something back to them, and then they post something back to us, and we back to them, and suddenly we've had this huge fight on social media with people that we actually have always loved, but now feel deeply disappointed in and feel like we can no longer have as friends. We speak our truth, our minds, without actually thinking about or researching, am I actually correct about this? And oftentimes we say things, we've heard something, we haven't taken the time to check it out to see if it was actually true, and then we post on that in anger and righteous indignation without ever having looked, is what I'm posting about actually accurate? I remember years ago, it used to be people would do this by sending emails out, and these were emails where they would have some inflammatory statement and some picture on it, and they say, can you believe what, and pick your administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, going all the way back. People would send these emails around, and they were designed to make you mad, and they were designed to get you upset, and then hopefully join their movement against whoever the politician was they were protesting against. And what I would say to people when they would come and see me after church, they say, Pastor Adam, did you see this thing? And I'm like, look, that doesn't even sound any way remotely accurate, that somebody was going to actually do this thing that they're just claiming, whether it was disband the army or take away, in God we trust or whatever. And so I'd say, will you just do this for me? Would you just go and search some of the websites? You can pick conservative ones and progressive ones, but look to see, is this actually true? Did this really happen? And often I would think, there's no way this happened. And then they would come back the next week and they say, you know what, you're right. That actually wasn't true. We'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks when we talk about, fake news and what happens on social media. But the point is that we can find ourselves inflamed, and then we act before we actually do our research and our homework to see if these things are actually true. So part of what we have to do is make sure, am I posting on something that's actually true? Did it really happen? And then after I've done that, to make sure that my words are words that are going to have a chance to communicate rather than turn people off or away, that have actually thought about what somebody on the opposite side might be feeling. I think about this, and Jesus calls us to love our neighbors and even to love our enemies. And part of the way we do that is through our words and how we use social media. I think about a 13-year-old boy in our congregation who not long after he was confirmed took his own life. And when I think about him, I think about why he took his life. And why he took his life was because he was being bullied and people were saying things about him that weren't accurate or true. And it just hurt. And he didn't have the capacity to be able to deal with those hurt feelings. And he was dealing with depression, and he took some medication that actually, made it worse instead of better. But it all was in the power of words. All right, I can tell you that a lot of bullying happens on social media. We'll talk about that more next week. But as we think about that, I think about the comments I receive. So if you're a more public figure, you're gonna have a lot of those kind of comments, and people are gonna make assumptions about you, and they're gonna say things about you, and they're gonna, sometimes they're saying it to their friends, but they copy you in there somewhere, especially with Twitter. They'll include, at Rev A Hamilton or whatever my Twitter feed is. And so I'm like, did you know I was gonna see that? Did you know it was gonna come into my feed and I'm gonna actually see these words that you've just said? And there are times, you receive those nasty, snarky comments about yourself. Maybe it's what somebody said on your Facebook post, on feed or in Snapchat or somewhere else. And you get those things, and what you want to do is fight back. Either it hurts you or you find yourself getting defensive. And so I remember some years ago, I was walking around, I was taking a power walk, and I was reading what somebody just said about me from another United Methodist Church. And when I read it, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And what I knew is don't say anything, but at the same time, I'm power walking and I'm getting all worked up and I'm like, and then I post something while I'm walking, probably half misspelled too while I'm doing it. And it's like the moment I sent it, I wanted to take it back because I realized, I didn't make that any better. I just made it even worse. And this person's going to keep coming back at me. And somewhere along the way, wisdom comes. And the older I've gotten, the more I feel like I'm able to say, you know what, I don't have to respond. I have no obligation to respond to whatever nasty thing you've said. I can just let it go. And often that's the best thing to do. I'm a big boy and I can handle that, but I know that there are a lot of people who maybe are younger and it becomes even harder to have those things said about you and then to try to respond and get into a fight and the hurt that you feel in that. And by the way, almost anybody is going to have nasty things said about them sometimes. So I was reminded of some of the comments that have been said about Mother Teresa after she died and people, dissing her on social media, or Billy Graham and how many times he was dissed while he was alive, not on social media, but in a whole host of other ways. Or I think about Pope Francis. And so, whoever it is, if Jesus were using social media, we're going to talk about that in a few weeks, he would be dissed by people. He would be criticized and people would be constantly haranguing him on social media. This is going to happen, and you've got to be able to handle that if you're going to be on social media. I think about Paul's words we memorized a few years ago, and I regularly cite them here. I memorized them, and they speak to me a lot. It's a passage that guides how I try to use social media as well. And you might just read this with me. It's from Ephesians 4:29, where Paul writes, "Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear." Think about that. On social media, what I'm posting, wherever it might be, am I having evil talk? And by the word evil there, evil there, as you may remember, is a word that has to do with putrefied. It's like something's gone rotten or been spoiled, food that you open up the Tupperware and it stinks to high heaven and you throw the Tupperware away because it's not worth even trying to save it. That's the word that's there. Don't let any evil talk come out of your mouth. But what is useful for building others up as there is need, that your words might give grace, undeserved favor to those who hear. So that leads to how we use social media. What are some good guidelines? I've been trying to hint at some of those up to this point. But how do we post things that actually get through? How do we respond to people who say things that are, cutting or hurtful to us? How do we do this? And I guess I'd ask you, have you ever experienced this from other people, cutting words? Have you ever potentially said things that cut other people? Have you been unfriended? Have you unfriended other people? Are there folks you no longer talk to because of the way they communicate on Facebook? So this week I was speaking to Kate O'Neill Rober, and as I was speaking to Kate, she is a specialist in public relations and communications. She does training for CEOs on how to use social media well, and I thought, I want to talk to her about how she coaches CEOs on this, and then I wanted to give you a chance to be coached by her as well. Take a listen. As you're coaching executives related to social media use, what is it you teach them?
When it comes to social media and companies and executives, there's a couple things to keep in mind. The first thing is that it's really tricky right now to be a person of influence and a brand, in the sense of if you do post something, you risk offending someone. If you don't post something, you risk offending someone. It's a dance. And most brands and most executives are new to the concept of social advocacy. So when we're sitting down with them and saying, okay, is this something that makes sense? There's a couple different filters that we think about that individuals at home can also use. The first filter we ask is, what's the end game? In the sense of, by what do we hope to achieve by posting or commenting? Is it to further the conversation? The second filter we think about is, have you earned the right to comment? In the sense of, from a CEO perspective, are you walking the walk? In the sense of, if you're out there posting about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and your board is made up of all individuals of the same race and same gender, you're not going to have the authenticity there. As an individual at home, you want to think about, okay, in order for me to have the right to comment, I need to think about and research not only my position, but what others think, what different positions think about this topic. And then the last thing we think about, the last filter we think about for executives and for brands is, how do you want to show up? In the sense of, words can be used as a tool or they can be used as a weapon. How do you want to be remembered? Those are really three filters we use when thinking about executives and brands and what they comment on social media.
What I think is interesting about that is that doesn't just apply to executives, although an executive can blow up their company if they misuse social media. That's why most executives, certainly the ones that Kate works with, they have 5 different people look at their tweets or their social media comments before they actually press send. That's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, you're an executive, that you're a key leader in a company. You have 5 people review it before you actually send it out. That's a pretty good idea too, or at least another set of eyes, and be able to say, before I post this, how do you think this is going to come across? Ask your friends, your family, your spouse, your coworkers, how will this come across if I post this in this way? But I think it's worth writing down these 3 ideas. I'd love for you to just take notes and write this down. What's the end game? If you're going to post, what's the end game? What's the purpose? What's the aim of what you're doing? Number 2, have you earned the right to comment? That is, are you walking the walk and not just talking the talk? And have you done your homework before you post on something that's controversial? You don't have to do this when you're posting pictures of your kids. This is about when you're taking a stand, you're posting something about a deeply held conviction. And number 3, how do you want to show up? Words, this idea of using words either as tools or as weapons. Am I going to use my words as tools or as weapons? One of the things that I teach across the country when I teach preachers, I've written books about this as well, is when you're preaching on something controversial or something difficult, one of the questions you want to ask is, what's my aim? And is my aim to influence people or merely to irritate them? To influence or to irritate? And you know what? It's easy, and it takes no particular skills to irritate people. It takes great skill to speak to people, to share words that you hope will actually influence people. Maybe it'll change their minds. Maybe it'll help them see things a little differently. Maybe it'll cause them to just take a pause for a moment. Influencing people takes sensitivity, it takes compassion, it takes understanding where other people are coming from, and then trying to find a way to communicate that doesn't just blow up the conversation, but instead invites people to actually listen. And in turn, for you to be willing to listen and understand as well. Is your aim to influence or merely irritate people? Just too easy to irritate. Takes skill to influence. Take the time to figure out how to do that. And again, figuring out your aim, so why am I posting this thing? And is it going to make a difference? And am I posting it in a way that might actually influence people? And then when she talks about having earning the right to comment, have you actually done your homework? So many times, again, like those old emails that circulated around, people just assume that they know what's true, and they haven't taken the time to do their homework, and they end up alienating people instead of speaking truth. People look at you and go, hey, there's more to that story. I remember some years ago, there was a story that happened. It was being shown on the news. And it was the kind of story that made a lot of people really angry, and they wanted to comment on social media. And somebody said, aren't you going to comment on social media? And this is another thing is, again, if you're a leader, and like at Resurrection, we're divided about 40% Democrat, 40% Republican. You got to figure out when I'm getting ready to report something or to comment on something online, have I done my homework? Do I have enough information? And on that particular one, I had people like, how come you haven't commented yet on this? And I'm like, because I'm waiting to see more information. I'm not going to comment until I have more information. And about half the time when there's something like that I feel a little check in my stomach, like, be careful. Then by the time you get more information and you see like the full clip as opposed to just the little bit that was posted on social media, you go, you know what? I'm glad I didn't comment on that, because it didn't end up, the story was the way it was first told. And so being careful about that is important. And along the way, to be able to ask, how can I speak about this in a way that my words will be a tool to help people have greater understanding, or at least to invite them to think about it differently, versus a weapon in which I'm just blowing something up. And all of these things are important, not only for pastors and leaders and CEOs, it's important for every one of us, all of us, that when we're commenting on these things, we should speak up. It's important. The scripture tells us to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves, that we're to work for justice and righteousness, and we're to work towards seeing God's kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So, we have to have moments where we have enough courage to be able to speak up, but we need to make sure that we know why we're doing what we're doing, what our goal is, and we need to think about, are we trying to influence or merely irritate, and not using our words as weapons, but instead as tools. Now, I asked Kate if she'd ever posted anything that she had regretted. And I wanted you to hear this in particular, because oftentimes when somebody's snarky towards us, we end up being snarky towards them, and then we regret it. Take a listen to what Kate had to say, and you might just take a few notes as well. Have you ever posted something you wished you could have taken back?
Absolutely. I've been on both ends of that. And I think most of us probably have. I've been in the situation where I posted something that I regretted. And it was early on in politics. And I wish I hadn't posted it. And I wish I hadn't posted it because I didn't follow the rule of earning the right to comment. I read a few headlines and thought I could weigh in. And ultimately, I don't know that I came across the best Kate, or that I contributed to the conversation in a thoughtful manner. I've also, in my own family, had the experience where they perceived I viewed something one way, and as a result, won't engage with me anymore. And that's hurtful too. And it's These are all around topics that probably aren't best suited for social media. They're more appropriate to have conversations in place, face to face. There's a quote from Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's second in command, if you will. And in it, he talks about how it's our job to consider opposing arguments before weighing in with our own. So essentially, we need to understand where the other person is coming from before we come to the table with what we think.
What are some things to remember for folks in our congregation when they have that kind of snarky comment aimed at them? How do we respond to that?
It's important to remember that silence is an answer. I think of those people as flamethrowers. They want to throw it out there and they just want to see the explosion and the reaction. But are you truly going to change their mind? Probably not. Going back to our 3 filters, what's the desired impact? If I'm going to engage with them, what's the long-term goal and what am I trying to achieve? And if my long-term goal is to try to change their minds, it's probably not going to happen in that forum. And so to remember that silence is an answer. Social media is an engagement and it's a conversation. It's not one way. You don't want to post and then ghost, to put it in a quip. You want to share, but it's also to draw out and to engage. And so if you're going to put something out there, the first thing is to say, here's what I think. The second thing to say is, here's why I think that. The third thing to say is my intent. But I want to understand what you think so I can be educated. It's almost like a 1, 2, 3 recipe for kindness on social.
I think there's a lot of helpful wisdom there about how we go about posting. When it's not pictures of our kids or whatever. These are talking about really meaningful and substantive issues that are important to us and how we communicate in a way that might actually influence and not merely irritate. Let me just remind you again, and worth writing down, silence is an answer. You don't always have to speak or respond to somebody's snarky answers. And often when you don't respond to it, you find it's better for you and for other people, and people end up feeling more sympathetic to your cause. The number 2 is social media is a conversation, which means that you're inviting people to contribute to a conversation as opposed to just flame throwing. Number 3, here's what I think. So to be able to communicate, this is what I think about this. Here's why I think that, and then here's my intention. I'm inviting you into a conversation with me about this. I'm not trying to tell you I have all the answers and I know everything. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about 2 scriptures that guide me when it comes to social media. And I don't always practice this, so I'm going to tell you, this is my aim. This is what I try to do. Sometimes I fail too. I allow my emotions to get the best of me. But one of those is just the golden rule, which Jesus says all the prophet and the law and the prophets hang on. You know it. Say it with me. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Those are the words of Jesus. So how am I going to post or respond on social media in a way that I hope people would do for me? How am I going to make comments in a way that I hope other people would do? And then the second one comes from Proverbs, and I really love this little verse. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs anger. And I try to practice that when it comes to somebody who's attacked me or it feels like they've attacked me. And if or said something that was critical or negative or whatever, and to be able to say, you know what? I so appreciate you sharing your thoughts. I care about you. You matter to God, and I know you have strong feelings about this. And we may disagree about this, but I still care about you. Now, how do you respond to that? And when you respond with, humility, I could be wrong. With humility, I care about you, despite the fact that you've just said something harmful. You don't even have to say that part. Just, I care about you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And the thing is, the other person, when you do that, you express kindness in response, that gentle answer. Most of the time, what I find is people will write me back, direct message or on the page and say, hey, I'm really sorry I acted that way. Or I'm sorry I came across so harshly. I just had a strong reaction to this thing you said or what's going on in our society. And something changes. But when you flame throw back at them, and you give them that angry answer, a harsh word, it stirs up anger. It just makes things worse. It's helpful to remember that. All right. And by the way, even Paul struggled with this. So Paul tells us, don't return evil for evil, but blessing instead. It's a great thing to live by. But even Paul in his letters, especially to the Galatians, ends up coming across in a way that doesn't reflect that. It's hard to do these things, but it's the right way to approach things most of the time. And that leads me to this idea of transforming the world. It's Martin Luther King weekend, and we're going to talk about, we're asking this question. So what do we learn about social media use from a man who lived when there was no social media, but there was media? And Dr. King had this vision of what he was trying to do, and that was to forward civil rights, to make sure that everyone was humanized, that there was an equality that happened among all people. I mean, there were so many things that he was trying to do in his work and had a profound impact on the world. And if you look to see, well, how did he do this? He wasn't usually a flamethrower. He would say difficult things, but he would say it in a way that people could hear it and tolerate it. Most people could. That doesn't mean they agreed with him all the time. In fact, at one point in 1966, 2 years before Dr. King's death, a Gallup poll was conducted in America and found that 2/3 of Americans did not like Dr. King. They viewed him unfavorably in 1966, and 40% of people gave the lowest possible rating, or maybe the highest unfavorable rating that you could possibly give, a -5 on the Gallup poll survey for their views about Dr. King in 1966. But it's interesting, over time, their views changed, and he had a huge impact on our country and our world. I want to say just one more word about that, but first I want to mention this, that the way you end up influencing people, one is simply using social media and to be able to positively communicate the values you have, to be able to speak up in some way and say, I think this is wrong, or, I think we should be doing this. And so there's a way to do that with kindness and gentleness in which you might actually be heard as opposed to flame throwing. But many experts in social media and social transformation say it's not enough simply to post something on social media. And part of the problem with social media is we think if we like somebody's post about something that we agree with, that we've actually done something. Well, we did something. We made a small statement. We might actually post a meme on our Facebook page. We might post an emoji somewhere about this idea of what needs to change, whether it's racial injustice or war in Ukraine or something else. I mean, these are things that we can do. We can post things, and posting things is a great start. And sometimes it takes great courage on your page to be able to say in a way people could hear, as I look at this, I really feel like we've got to be doing more. My own sense is this is just not right, and we've got to change. There's a way to do that with gentleness and humility, and that's a good start. A lot of people bash that, but I'm going to say that's a really good start to have the courage to just speak up on your social media. But here's the thing, if you only speak up on social media and you don't do any more than that, you've not really changed anything, or very little. And so in addition to using our influence to say, hey, we need to think about this differently, we also have to ask, what are we actually going to do about it? The University of British Columbia did a study to look to see people who posted on social media about any particular cause, did they do anything more than that? And what they found is that most of those people who posted one social media piece or a meme or something never did anything else besides that. And the world wasn't changed. And so the question is, are you doing more than simply posting on social media? And experts have talked about this. If you post on social media and you do nothing else, they talk about it as slacktivism, like slacking while trying to do activism. That is, I'm going to do the simple, safe thing, or I'm going to do just a tiny little thing and never do anything more than that, slacktivism. Now, I think it's a great start. Some people just criticize it. I think it's a good start. It's okay. But somewhere along the way, we want to do more than just slacktivism. We want to actually try to make a difference. And when I think about this idea of posting a meme, this week we have memes that you can post at core.org/next. You can go to that page. You can find a couple memes. And I hope on Dr. King Day, you'll actually post one of these. Here's an example of one. And this one, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. That's from Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. That's a great thing to post on your social media page. And I'll share another one in just a moment. And these are things that you can download from our core.org/next site. But better than that is to post the meme and then to be able to say, I'd like to invite you to join me. I'm going to be volunteering. And for many of you, 1,700 of you signed up to volunteer in Kansas City over this weekend, Saturday and then on Monday, to serve with your family and friends in Kansas City as a way of not just posting a meme, but actually doing something. And here's an example of what a post like that might look like. My church is serving in the community to work towards King's vision. Join me in finding a way to serve on this MLK weekend, showing the power of love. Let's change the world together. You see, that's an aspirational, visionary kind of thing to say, but it also says, this statement I agree with, and I'm actually going out to do something. I hope you'll do something too. And that's partly how the world has changed, is not just posting a meme, but saying I'm going to do something about it. Right? And our 1,700 opportunities are all full. There's no more room left. I'll be here on Monday at 9 a.m. at the Leawood location to go out and serve, but they're squeezing me in because they were already all filled up by the time I signed up. But I love this. So our faith, as James says, without works is dead, or we might say impotent. And thinking about how we use social media, Dr. King's words are still powerful today. Here's another meme that you can download. And you know these words, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. The key to Dr. King's influence on the world was not merely his words, as powerful as they were, but it was his willingness to demonstrate and live out a life of selfless, sacrificial love and to refuse to hate, but instead to overwhelm evil with good, as the Apostle Paul teaches. Dr. King was willing to demonstrate sacrificial love, which ultimately led to, after his death, a reversal. 2/3 of Americans came to admire and respect him in the years after his death. And by 1994, 94% of Americans, by 2011, 94% of Americans said that Dr. King was one of the most influential, important figures of our time, and he was a hero to most of those people. What changed? His willingness to lay down his life for what he believed in. So I wanted you to hear one of my favorite quotes of Dr. King's. It was from a 1967 sermon called Peace on Earth, although he'd used this statement many times across the years. Take a listen.
So throw us in jail, and we will still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and as difficult as it is, we will still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our communities at the midnight hour and drag us out on some wayside road and leave us half dead as you beat us, and we will still love you. Send your propaganda agents around the country and make it appear that we are not fit culturally and otherwise for integration, but we'll still love you. But be ye assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. And one day we will win our freedom. We will not only win freedom for ourselves, we will so appeal to your heart and conscience that we will win you in the process. And our victory will be a double victory.
So here it is. You know, what made all the difference in the civil rights movement in the 60s and Dr. King's work in the 50s and 60s was selfless, sacrificial love and defeating evil with good. I'd like to invite you, when you're using social media, to remember the things we talked about today, to live out your faith in how you communicate on social media, and to not only live it out, not only to post it, but to live a life of love. And when we do that, we find God's kingdom comes on earth as it is in heaven. Let's pray. Oh God, we confess to you that there are many times we have written things that were uninformed. We have responded to things on social media out of our anger or our disappointment or our hurt. We've alienated people from you and from each other, from us, by things that we've said or things that we've done. Help us to use our social media as a tool, not a weapon. Help us, oh God, to be clear about why we're saying what we're saying. Help us not to be afraid to speak up, but when we speak up, to do so, allowing our words to give grace to those who hear, and using them in our social media to demonstrate selfless, sacrificial love. Use us, we pray, in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for watching this week's sermon. We'd love for you to join us again for live worship, online or in person. To learn more about Church of the Resurrection, please visit core.org. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.